Hitler's drive for political power. The worldwide depression, which began with the Wall Street crash in 1929, gave Adolf Hitler the opportunity he had been waiting for. The economic life of the West became paralyzed. Banks failed, business firms went under, trade came to a stop. Millions of persons were thrown out of work. Though there was plenty of food available, millions of families found themselves without the money to buy it. There was hunger, chaos, confusion, despair. True, a similar situation prevailed in most countries, including the United States, but it was perhaps worst of all in Germany. This was just what Hitler needed. What was misery for others was a godsend to him. Only when men were hungry and desperate, and businessmen and bankers were going broke, could Nazism make an appeal to them. Hitler saw that the time for a new drive for political power had come. His first great opportunity came in the fall of 1930. The strain of the Depression was causing democratic parliamentary government in Germany to break down. The moderate Chancellor, Heinrich Brüning, was forced to rule by presidential decree because the Reichstag refused to vote his emergency measures to stem the tide. Brüning called a national election for September 14, 1930. He hoped to win a stable democratic majority. His hopes were blasted by Hitler. The Nazi leader, in a whirlwind electoral campaign, promised the German people a way out of their misery. The Nazi government, he declared, would refuse to pay reparations. In fact, it would tear up the Versailles Treaty, and Hitler promised it would put business back on its feet and see that every German had a job. Millions of confused, desperate Germans were deceived by this propaganda. The Nazis had received only 810,000 votes 2 years before. Now they polled 6.5 million. Against the 12 seats they previously held in the Reichstag, they won 107 places. Overnight, they jumped from the ninth and smallest political party in Germany to the second largest. This smashing success emboldened Hitler. Less than 2 years later, in the spring of 1932, he decided to run for president against the 84-year-old Field Marshal Paul von Hindenburg, who was up for re-election. Hindenburg, who had commanded the German army in World War I, was a national hero. Yet the brash young Nazi felt confident he could defeat him. Actually, Hitler was not legally eligible to run for president in Germany. As we have seen, he was not a German citizen, but he easily surmounted this obstacle by trickery. On February 25, 1932, the Minister of the Interior, a Nazi, of the small state of Brunswick, formally appointed Hitler attaché of the legation of Brunswick in Berlin. No one in Germany had remembered that Brunswick had a legation in Berlin. Foreign countries maintained legations in the capital, but Brunswick legation was a joke. However, the joke was on the German people, not on Hitler. By becoming an attaché, he automatically became a German citizen. He could run for president. Hitler's bid for the big prize failed. Though he more than doubled the previous record-breaking Nazi poll and received 13.5 million votes, this was only 37% of the total. Hindenburg was re-elected with a 53% majority, 10% of the votes going to a communist candidate. The majority of the Germans still rejected Hitler. He tried again to win over that majority in 2 Reichstag elections later during the year 1932. In the first, the Nazis polled nearly 14 million votes. This entitled them to 230 members in the parliament and made them easily the largest party in the country, but still in the minority. In the second election, the party's vote declined by 2 million and the Nazis lost 34 seats in the Reichstag. The legend that Hitler and the Nazis could not be stopped was shattered. The tide has begun to ebb. It seemed obvious that Hitler could never get a clear majority in free elections. But were there not other paths to political power? Hitler pondered the question as the year 1932 faded out. The democratic German Republic seemed doomed. The only question was which anti-democratic force would grab control of the country. The communists were too weak. Hitler realized that the old-school reactionaries Chiefly the Prussian aristocracy, big business, and the army had the inside track. He shrewdly decided to seek their support. These reactionary groups, by means of various intrigues, had in fact already seized control of the Republic before the end of 1932. In May of that year, they had persuaded President von Hindenburg to dismiss Brüning as Chancellor and appoint Franz von Papen. The latter was a former army officer of shallow mind who was rejected even by his own party, the Catholic Centre Party, finding no support in the Reichstag. Papen was maneuvered out of office on December 1st, 1932 by an army general, Kurt von Schleicher. In spite of their differences, Papen and Schleicher had one purpose in common. They intended to bury the German Republic and eventually restore the Hohenzollern monarchy. This would have meant the end of Hitler and his aspirations to become dictator. Hitler realized this clearly. The time had come, he saw, to do a little intriguing of his own with the reactionaries. But first he had to overcome a crisis in his own party, which threatened to become disastrous. Gregor Strasser, the number 2 man in the party, had come to the conclusion after the Nazi setback in the November elections that Hitler could never get the majority vote which would make him chancellor. In December 1932, he therefore urged Hitler to accept an offer from Chancellor Steicher to become vice-chancellor. Hitler was furious at the very idea. He could not be second man. The two top Nazi leaders had a showdown meeting in Berlin on December 7. It degenerated into a bitter quarrel that threatened to wreck the party. Hitler was out of his mind, as an entry in the diary of Dr. Goebbels, who was present, makes clear. For hours, the Führer paces up and down in the hotel room. He's embittered. Finally, he stops and says, "If the party falls to pieces, put an end to it all in 3 minutes with a pistol shot." The Nazi party did not fall apart, and Hitler did not shoot himself. Strasser, who had been boss of the actual party machine, might have achieved both of these ends and thus radically changed the course of history. But at the crucial moment, he resigned from the party in disgust and went off for a rest in Italy. Hitler, always at his best when he detected weakness in an opponent, struck swiftly and hard. He took over the direction of the party machine himself and purged it of Strasser's supporters. He made all the party bosses sign a new oath of loyalty to himself and acknowledge him as absolute party dictator. Having reestablished his authority within the Nazi ranks, he was ready to renew his bid for political power in Germany. To achieve this, he said frankly, he was quite willing to make a pact with the devil. The devil turned out to be Papen, who was eager for revenge against General Schleicher for having replaced him as chancellor. Papen, as Hitler knew, was still the favorite of President von Hindenburg. In the absence of any party majority in the Reichstag, appointed whomever he wished to be chancellor. Papen and Hitler met secretly on January 4th, 1932, and worked out a deal. They agreed to form a government in which Hitler would be chancellor and Papen vice-chancellor. In return for being top man, Hitler agreed to appoint a cabinet in which the non-Nazi reactionaries behind Papen would be in the majority. Now all depended on whether the two intriguers could persuade President von Hindenburg to approve their deal. They worked on the president's son, Colonel Oskar von Hindenburg, and they worked on the aging field marshal himself. They also sought and won support from some of the army generals, from the Prussian aristocrats, and from leading businessmen and bankers. Shortly before noon on January 30, 1933, Adolf Hitler was summoned to be chancellery by President von Hindenburg. Across the square from the chancellery, 3 men stood at the window in a room at the Kaiserhof Hotel. They were Göring, Goebbels, and Captain Röhm, the 3 top Nazi leaders after Hitler. Röhm focused binoculars on the chancellery door. He would be able to see from Hitler's face, as Goebbels later said, whether the miracle had happened. A few minutes past noon, they saw that it had. Hitler emerged crying with joy. His eyes, Goebbels noted, were full of tears. By means of a shabby political deal with the reactionaries he privately detested and who despised him, The one-time Vienna tramp and self-styled revolutionary had become Chancellor of the German Republic he had sworn to destroy.